Welcome everybody to this webinar in which Paula, a Mind Mirror owner and also a neurofeedback practitioner and a nurse, she has many talents, is going to lead this webinar and talk to us about neurofeedback and how and whether, in which ways really, it coincides with Mind Mirror, or we'll be able to ascertain that ourselves, and we'll be able to ask some questions. Paula, how do you want to set this up? Do you want to have people ask questions afterwards or what?
No, they can ask questions as we're going along, or maybe if we stop every couple of slides and ask them, if they have questions, that would work too, because that way I can maybe gauge how well I'm communicating my thoughts.
Sounds great. So we'll let you be in charge of that, and we'll just sit back and enjoy if that's all right.
Judith, shall we ask Paula maybe where she started and how she ended up doing neurofeedback in the Mind Mirror? If this is not part of your presentation, Paul, I would appreciate if you just say a couple of words in the beginning, because it's always interesting how people come across this path, being a nurse initially.
When I started nursing, I was an ICU shock trauma nurse in a tertiary care center right out of the gate. So I finished my nursing career, or my nursing training. I took my boards and I started in this ICU shock trauma unit. And so there I was working with people with severe head trauma. I learned a lot of physiology in the way we handled the autonomic nervous system for these people because they weren't unable to. So like our ventilators helped them breathe because their brains no longer taught them, controlled their breathing. We would give them electrolytes and fluids, and we put them on pressure drips to help control their blood pressures. So in that way, I was learning about the brain from a very clinical standpoint. And so after about 5-6 years there, I stopped nursing to take care of my kids. And when it was time to go back into the workforce, I decided I had always wanted to work with animals. So I decided I was going to learn to groom, and I opened up a grooming salon and a boarding kennel, which I stayed in for 15 years. And it's crazy because the universe kind of put me from one area that you would think would be completely disconnected into another area. And from there, I learned body language. And I didn't realize I was doing heart rate variability with the dogs to help calm them down. And I got really good at understanding how to calm the nervous system of the dogs that I worked with. I would take them one-on-one into a separate room, the ones that were unmanageable. And if I had them just there by myself, I learned that I could calm them down and groom dogs that nobody else could groom. And even slow down my breathing and do the slow, deep breathing. And I didn't realize at the time I was doing my own biofeedback to calm down my nervous system. And, if you follow HeartMath and their coherence, I was making the dogs coherent. So that was kind of an interesting addition that would help me when I came to neurofeedback. But what happened was I was getting migraines. I had migraines from the time I was 4 years old, severe migraines, like probably at least 3-4 times a week. I would be vomiting 3-4 times a week. And I loved grooming the dogs, but every time I would lift a dog, it got to the point where I had migraines almost every day. And I was working 24/7 because I liked taking care of the dogs the way I knew that they should be taken care of. And so I kind of didn't want anybody else to do my job because I felt secure that they were very well cared for. And I work weekends, I'd work holidays, I'd get up and be there at 6 a.m. And when we'd have boarding dogs, which was almost all the time, I'd leave at 9:30 at night. So those were my days with migraines. And the one day my migraine was so bad, I remember looking up to heaven I didn't even know where my prayer was going, but I said, someone please help me with this. I can't do this anymore. So from that point, it was maybe 2 weeks later, we got a postcard in the mail, and the postcard had 2 people kayaking. Well, I had won a kayak probably the week before at a trade show where we bought our dog food that we would sell at the boarding kennel. And it was a postcard for a director, an ER director's job, which was my husband's job. And I said, call about this job. He said, no, I have a job. I'm like, it's not going to hurt. Just call. There was something about the kayaks and me owning the kayak. And right before this, he had purchased a kayak himself, even though we never kayaked. And so we called about the job, and long story short, we ended up moving from where we had lived 25 years, from the business that I had built from the ground that I thought I would never leave. We thought we would, die in the same house that we went into after we were married. And so suddenly I was without a job for the first time in my life. And I had worked since I was 14. And we had passed on the road up here this beautiful building. I didn't know what it was. I looked it up. It's a Himalayan Institute. So what did they teach? They taught meditation. And I thought, oh, I don't have anything to do. I want to learn meditation. That building's so beautiful. I want to go there, but I don't want to go there until I know how to meditate, because I was very self-conscious and I didn't want them to think that I didn't know anything. So I tried meditation at home, and I couldn't calm what I now know is my beta waves down enough to meditate. So the one morning I was kind of at wit's end. I went, like, our house was all cleaned. It was all painted. I'm like, I have absolutely nothing to do today. And I got in the bathtub, a warm bathtub, with kind of the thought in my head, what am I supposed to do? And I laid in the bathtub, and it's going to sound crazy, but it had a yellow light kind of engulfed me. And I started crying, and I felt love like I had never felt before. And I don't know if I heard the words or if I just understood them in my head, but all I got was just love the ones that are in your life. But when I got out of the bathtub, and I don't even know how long it took, when I got out of the bathtub, I realized that my migraines were gone. I had been on Topamax. I stopped taking the Topamax. I didn't tell my husband I'd stopped, but he said to me, like, oh, you're not complaining about migraines all the time. Like, because he would ask me every morning, how's your head? Because we knew, like, if my head was bad, that's how our day was going to go. And so every time he'd say, how's your head? I'd say, it's okay. And I knew something had happened in my head while I was in that bathtub. So I started researching, and I found brainwaves and how do you change brainwaves, and how could I help other people to kind of experience what I experienced in that bathtub. Mm-hmm. And that's how I found neurofeedback. So that's my story. So since then, I've just kind of been an explorer of consciousness. And along the way, I found this modality to help people along my journey. I opened my little office where I do clinical neurofeedback to clients that just show up at my door. So I don't look for a diagnosis. Whoever comes in, I kind of feel like they're supposed to be there. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about how I treat the people that I see that come in. I realized when I opened my practice, when I learned neurofeedback, that what we were actually doing was giving the brain a way to see into what it was doing. So I call my practice Mind Vision. When I started, I got certification. And so this if you're thinking about doing neurofeedback clinically, the certification helps. I think it helped me become confident that I knew enough to be able to see clients. So I got certified in neurofeedback through BCIA, and then I got my QEEG certification to be able to interpret the maps and use the maps in a clinical setting. And after that, I got my certification in biofeedback. I became a HeartMath certified trainer. I use that primarily with every single patient that comes into my office. And I became a Amen Clinic certified brain health coach. And sometimes I use their supplements for the clients that I see. And it was interesting when I didn't know Mind Mirror existed when I first started. And I always used this quote when I talk to my clients about neurofeedback: use a mirror in difficult times and you see both the cause and the resolution. And when I'm explaining neurofeedback to clients, I explain it as, if you're a ballet dancer, you can have a coach say to you, oh, you need to look, if your leg is supposed to be at 45 degrees, you need to be higher, you need to be lower. But if you look in a mirror, you can see exactly when it's right. And eventually you don't need that mirror because you form that muscle memory. And so that's the way I explain it to my clients. And I think that's pretty accurate. So the first thing that I do is I get a QEEG map of the brain. And so I use the caps. There's a 19 sites on the brain caps. I first abrade the area a little bit with like a little abrasive gel, and then I fill those holes with a gel that's salty so that it conducts electricity to read the map. And then this is the raw data that I get. There's different ways to read this raw data. It's all the same information, but there's different montages that you can use to interpret the information. So if you look up in this one, you'll see that the montage uses linked ears. And what that does, if you see like FP1, FP2, they're all going to LE. So it's comparing the activity at FP1 to the left ear. There's also montages that I use for people that are on psychoactive meds that compare, for instance, like F3 to F4 and FP2 or any of the adjacent sites. And what that does is lets me see what each individual site is doing, irregardless of the sites around them. So it helps me filter out the effects of meds. And a lot of my clients are on meds. So that's a different montage that I'll use. There's also called one, it's a double banana. So it reads the information going back along the skull. I use that if I see any activity that looks like maybe seizure activity. It helps you locate where the seizure might be, where the aberrant activity might be starting. So then what I do with that information is put that into different databases. I'm kind of a stickler for getting information right, so I use a lot of different databases, and each different database gives me it's using the same raw data, just interpreting it a different way. And each different database gives me a different way that I like to look at it. So that's why I use so many databases. Like for instance, this one is QEEG Pro. One of the things that I like about this one, it gives me these breakdowns of, like for instance, the topographical map. It gives me a breakdown of output peak frequency. So I don't depend on one database. I like to make sure that all the different databases that I'm using are giving me the same information. Then I'm more confident in the areas that I choose my protocols for. So this is one of the QEEG databases. This is an eyes closed map, a 25-year-old male. This one is a very similar pattern that I see in people that ruminate a lot, people with high anxiety. You see that central high activity, and it's almost all through the whole map. You see lower activity in the front, probably a hard time focusing. And why they're having a hard time focusing is because that high central activity is essentially using up their battery. So, if there's a loop playing in their head about some kind of trauma, they're certainly not going to pay attention to what's going on in the world around them. So that's an absolute power. So this map is telling me this is the actual power that the brain is making, not relative to any kind of database. And you'll see it goes all the way from 0 hertz up to 40 hertz. So you have your 0 to 4, that's your delta. And it's a little different in different databases. They all set those bandwidths a little bit differently. 4 to 7 is your theta. Alpha's 8 to 12. We look for a rhythm. I'm not sure if we concentrate on it so much with the mind mirror, but a rhythm right over the sensory motor area, right down the middle of 13 to 15, and we call that a sensory motor rhythm. That's something that I target in kids with classic ADD that have trouble paying attention, ADD and ADHD.
So Paula, I'm always puzzled by these maps. I understand that the red means the most activity and the blue means the least. And so would you say that this person looking at the top row of frequencies, 21, 22, 23, so forth, that's where most of their activity is that they're really operate? Is that what this says by there being the most red in those frequencies?
So those are the areas with the highest activity. And this is 21 hertz to 40 hertz, but we can go back and look at, here's 1 hertz up to 20. So you see at 1 hertz, your delta is right over that central area, right over that anterior cingulate, which is where our attention is. And then, their theta starts to slowly move towards the back. Same with
as you go into higher frequencies, are thetas moving to the back, right, or is it lower?
As you go into the higher frequencies, the higher bandwidths, it starts to move back a little bit. I've done this so often and no one's ever really talked about, but I tend to think of the brain as from the back being past and the front being future. Because I notice a lot of people with early childhood trauma that, that hasn't been resolved, will have high activity in the back. And then you get closer to that hippocampus and your memories. And then as you go to the central area, you have your sensory motor rhythm. So that's present. Where am I present? Am I sitting still present? Am I attuned to what's going on me present? I mean, that's where our anterior cingulate is. That's where am I now? That's how I consider the brain. And then as you get into your prefrontal cortex, that's your planning and your executive function. You're thinking about the future. You're thinking about, how you're going to organize things. So, and I don't know that I've ever heard it taught that way, but for me, it seems to coincide with the clients that I see. If they have really trouble with impulse control and planning, they have a lot of deficit in the front. If they have a lot of trauma, especially in alpha, we'll see low alpha in the back.
That makes some sense from a mind mirror perspective, that you would see more low alpha in the back.
Mm-hmm. And there's a typical pattern that I see with the addictive population that I see.
So it's more attention on the past, on the addictions, and the lower frequencies.
Well, what I normally see in my addictive population is I see that high central beta, high beta. So not, like your beta 2. And I see low alpha. And I'm working with a population of all males in the drug rehab facility. I mean, I see mixed population in my office, but for the males, it's very low alpha on the right side And for the general population, both males and females, I see low alpha in the back.
Oh, you don't mean like low alpha and lower alpha frequencies. You mean less amplitude in alpha.
Like a definite, right, correct.
Ah, okay. That makes perfect sense. Alpha blocking then.
Right. You're right. And they really don't know who they are. So then this is another aspect of the QEEG Pro database that I use. So this is S-Loretta, and what S-Loretta does, it takes all those 19 sites and it kind of uses them like a GPS. So it says, if I'm reading information here, here, and here, I can triangulate that information and determine where it's come from in lower structures. Just like a GPS uses these, these 3 towers to triangulate your car and say, your car is here. It says, okay, I have this much activity here, this much here, and this much here. So where deeper in the brain is this activity coming from? And so this is another reason why I like QEEG Pro, because I can get these S-Loretta maps from them. And then they give you like a symptom of deficit. Sometimes they're on board, sometimes they're not on board, but it gives you an idea. If I see somebody with addiction and it's saying, yes, this is a symptom of a deficit or a symptom of, high power, I can use those sites to train that area. And this is all the same person's map. And another thing QEEG Pro does, so this I think is kind of going to your question, Judith, is it gives me an alpha peak distribution. So that kind of tells me which part of the brain is running the show, which one is my conductor. And if you look at this guy, his the highest one is that peak at PZ. So that's my part of the brain that's running the show. And usually we'll have an alpha peak frequency of between 7 and 11. If it's very high, it tends to be correlated with anxiety. But the interesting thing they found with eyes closed alpha peak frequency is also correlated with IQ. So if you have a high IQ alpha peak frequency, or a high alpha peak frequency, and you have a high IQ, those two go together.
My grandson's going to be really happy to hear that. He's got an alpha peak at 12.5. But look, he had a QEEG, and I hear you about the different opinions from different sources, because they told him that the 12.5 peak could mean either that he had a high IQ or that he had anxiety.
Anxiety, yep.
So, those are two very different things.
Well, yeah, but I think they can be both. I think they can be both. We see our folks that are very high IQ often have other I don't want to say comorbidities, because IQ isn't a morbidity, but they often have, other things going on. Think of your absent-minded professor, or your antisocial, or social difficulty with high IQ. So that can cause anxiety too.
It's true. Can you say a little tiny bit more about the location of the alpha in the back of the head? Because of course that's where we're measuring for the mind mirror. So when you say that it means that alpha is running the show if it's in the back of the head, what's that actually mean?
Well, so the alpha peak frequency, so this, I interpret that as, this guy kind of, whoops. In this case, this is kind of true. I interpret the back of the head with that past. So your alpha peak frequency is high at PZ, and this man was kind of living in the past. So that's where his attention would be. He had a lot of issues going on in his past that he needed to work through. And I mean, like sometimes I'll have a musician with alpha peak frequency at P4 or C4, because that's our musical area. That's where we hear and interpret music. Somebody that's like a financial analyst, you might see alpha peak frequency up at F3. Somebody that's a linguist, P3. So it's a part of the brain, and I kind of interpret it as, when you go into an environment, a store, or something where there's a lot of stimuli, what attracts your eyes? Like I go into, flipping through a magazine, I see something with a dog, and my attention is there. So, somebody with music, they will interpret, even waveforms musically. They'll see different waveforms and think, oh, how would this sound musically? So it's kind of the part of the brain that runs the show.
So are you saying here that you'll look early on for the alpha peak frequency because it's going to be the strongest power in the brain, and then you want to see what part of the brain that strongest power is located in?
Right.
Wow, that's
so
fantastic.
See, like that at that PZ, that's my conductor there.
This is really targeted. I mean, I didn't realize that. I mean, I thought that alpha was the tuner for the rest of the brain, and that how you get to peak performance is that the alpha spreads into different lobes and they move into hopefully phase synchrony. But I suppose that you're taking these measurements while the person's not doing anything; they're just sitting. And
Well,
it's just
this one is eyes closed. So where is his brain when his eyes are closed?
Do you do an eyes open too to see if there's a difference?
Yes. Yeah. And that's another kind of interesting pattern. I think I have something in there to show you about that too. Sometimes I won't see an alpha peak frequency at all. Sometimes there is no determinable peak frequency. And I see that a lot in my addictive population. There's just nobody really, they just don't know who they are. They don't know what they're attracted to, or what what motivates them. Or so then this is another part of QEEG Pro, and other databases have this also. So one of the things I look at is coherence, and think of coherence as how well the different parts of the brain are talking to each other, how much information they're sharing. And it was crazy. The very first client that I did, she was a 16-year-old client, severely developmentally delayed. She was on the autism spectrum. She had no conversational speech, very little bodily controls. And she came in, and I did her map. And the first thing you get on the map is just the amplitude, those colored maps that we looked at first. And I thought, oh gosh, this is my first client. I really don't know what I'm looking at, because her map looks better than mine. And I got down to coherence, and what was showing up in that is the red lines are fast. They're talking a lot. The blue lines are low. They're not talking very much. Her entire coherence map from 1 hertz to 40 hertz was bright red. So when one area of her brain got information, the entire brain was getting information. So she was just totally overwhelmed with the environment. There was too much stimuli, and you see that with kids on the spectrum. They'll cover their ears, they hide from the lights, they hide from, stimuli. They're just overwhelmed. And so when I trained her, I did about 70 sessions on this girl with the full cap. And I'll talk about Z-score training. And we lost a lot of those connections. And after 70 sessions, by the time she left me, she was able to be continent of urine. That was a big thing. She was able to sleep through the night. She hadn't slept through the night for 16 years. She could have a conversation. She calls me. In fact, my phone buzzed while I'm here. She calls me pretty often and reads books to me over the phone.
Wow, this is amazing too, because you would think, given the studies on coherence, that what you want is connection in all parts of the brain. that's what coherence is moving toward, that connection. But you're saying here that there can be too many connections.
I think the difference is that when you're looking for connections, you're in control of those connections. That I think that's the difference between what I found when I use the mind mirror. I liken it to like this clinical neurofeedback is like physical rehab. So, somebody goes to a physical therapist with a broken leg and they're trying to help them use that leg better because that leg is kind of stuck in a position that's not optimal. But with the mind mirror, it's like going to a personal trainer to say, how can I do this faster? How can I do this better? So, you are able to control that coherence. Whereas this girl, it was getting in her way.
I wonder if the reticular activating system in the brainstem plays a role in that too. I mean, I don't suppose there's any way you can measure whether that RAS is doing its job of modulating incoming information.
And I think, we know that the thalamus creates that theta and that the beta rides on theta and, ultimately the gamma really rides on it. So if you have your impulses coming from a deeper structure like that thalamus, and it cannot distinguish which area of the brain, the impulses are going to, I think we're probably training the thalamus as training her, which is why I used the whole cap. I mean, there was no area of the brain that I could pick out and say, if we ask this area to change, your symptoms are going to change. And then this is more coherence down to 40 hertz.
How did you actually train her? Like, so you used the Z-score training, but like, what was it training a theta in some sense?
So what I trained it, so I use Z-score training for everybody. And there's a lot of different ways to train. You can train by amplitude. I could say, you know what, you're making a lot of high beta centrally. I'm only going to reward you when that beta goes down. I don't do that because I think that brain made that beta for a reason. And who am I to tell it to get rid of that? So I like Z-score training. I think there's a misinterpretation about Z-score training that you're asking that brain to be like everybody else's brain. And that is completely as far from the truth. I mean, it is the one way that I'm not asking everybody's brain to be the same. If I'm down training a high beta, I'm asking that brain to be like somebody else's brain. Like, oh, well, most people have this amount of beta here. But your brain has this amount of beta here. Well, maybe you are really good socially. And so your brain made that high, that brainwave for a reason. Maybe you're good, with proprioception. Maybe you can balance on a unicycle. So who am I to say to that brain, get rid of that activity? So the way I do Z-score training is I ask the brain to get rid of, to get 50% of its activity at any one time moving towards that bell curve. Okay, and I have it on here. I'll show you the bell curve. So it's like 99.9 or 99% of the population at the very edges of the bell curve. So I'm only asking the brain to move those 50% at any one time. So like in this second, it might choose this brainwave to move there. In the next second, it might choose another one, but at any one time, 50%. So the brain chooses better than the clinician all the time. Your brain knows what it needs better than I know what your brain needs. And so it invariably chooses areas that it wants to regulate better based on how it's functioning in the world. So that's why I do Z-score. Every once in a while, I'll throw in a little bit of amplitude, but if I'm really stuck, but usually if I'm stuck, it's probably maybe a metabolic issue, maybe a toxin, Maybe I'm stuck because, like, for instance, if I have somebody, a little kid with high beta that has anxiety, and every day they go home to a volatile household, well, that anxiety is serving a purpose. It's keeping them safe, So if that anxiety doesn't want to go down, it's not my job to force it down. Does that make sense?
So what would you do in that hypothetical situation?
What I do, and this comes up a lot, is I train the parents sneakily. So what I do, usually when I see kids like that have high beta, they're getting it from their parents. The parents are just overwhelmed. Maybe they're not as patient with the child as they should be, or as they could be in an optimal world. So what I do is the parents are sitting there while their child's training, and I show them, okay, we're going to work with heart rate variability with your child. I'd like you to show them how to do heart rate variability. And then, you know what? How about if while he's training, you do some heart rate variability while you're waiting?
That is sneaky. That's sneaky. Smart sneaky.
And then I kind of sneak in. Once they're able to hear me, I'm like, I bet I can guess what your brain looks like. Do you want to take a look? And usually once they see it, then they'll admit, like, oh gosh, I'm overwhelmed. This is just another way to look at coherence. This is coherence on Joule. And then Joule gives you like which networks are being activated. Like you're on this one, maybe this guy needs some work on their default mode network. Okay, where their brain goes when they're not really doing anything. And so these gives me ideas of areas to choose protocols from. And here is that posterior dominant rhythm that I'm looking for, that alpha peak frequency. And that's the one that's correlated with IQ and also with anxiety. So this person didn't have a real specific alpha peak frequency. They kind of hover between 9 and 11. That's still a little bit on the high side. And then this gives me all of the areas laid out in Z-scores so I can see where my big outliers are. So like that one, the yellow one, that's C3 is telling me that's like my highest Z-score away from average. And then this is kind of an interesting one. So classical ADD, ADHD, they look at for a theta beta ratio. So they say, are you making more theta than beta? Is that why you're having trouble paying attention? And with a classic ADD, they are. So this helps me decide, is this kid really having trouble paying attention because of that theta beta ratio? My kind of take on this theta beta ratio is it's not a child's problem, that ADD isn't necessarily anything even to really be trained. It's a poor fit society. So if you think about where our brains, a baby only makes delta. And then, as you get a little bit older and you start that imaginary play, you're starting to make some theta now. You're living in, you have imaginary friends, you're living in an imaginary world, so you're making theta. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, hey, I'm my own person, like I can feel differently than you can feel. And that's our alpha coming on board. And then after that, you go to school and you're learning things and you have that beta being activated. You're in school a while, you start to realize, oops, I don't fit in. Maybe I'm not getting the best grades as somebody else. Maybe I'm not as good as football. And you have that high beta kick in, that anxiety. And then hopefully we get to a place where there's something bigger than ourselves, and that's our gamma. So I see it as the brainwaves kind of as a progression and evolution from birth to death. And I think, there's kids that have slower growth spurts than other kids. So maybe at 9 years old, you're not as tall as this other kid at 9 years old. Maybe at 16, you're going to be taller than them. But he had his, he gets his growth spurt maybe a little bit earlier. So, I think these kids that have ADD and ADHD, that have the real ADHD and ADD, that have the high theta beta ratio, that maybe their brain is just a little bit slower to get rid of that imaginary world. And that's why they have trouble paying attention. But what happens is they don't fit in a classroom, because the girls especially girls tend to mature a little bit faster. Their prefrontal cortexes mature around 28. Boys, or 25, boys mature around 28. And so they're trying to fit in with kids that are their same age, but don't have same kind of brains developmentally yet. And so what happens is we're giving them Adderall, to speed their brains up. They don't fit in already, so they're already starting to get some of that high beta anxiety. And then we're adding stimulants on top of that, which will make some of that. It looks like it works, because, hey, now they can pay a little bit of attention because it is speeding the brain up. But now we've got somebody that's used to stimulants and such high anxiety. Have we really done them any services? So maybe just giving them time to mature a little bit instead of forcing it on them.
If the parents want you to force it on them through neurofeedback, what do you do? Do you squash the theta?
I don't squash anything. What I'll do is I train by Z-score. So usually along with that pattern, I'll see some high beta. So that's another reason I train by Z-score. I'm asking that brain, what can you do to optimize your function? So can you get rid of a little bit of that high beta? And if that brain wants to, it will do it. And along with that, I'm doing heart rate variability with these kids. So that also helps them calm that anxious brain down, which maybe makes it a little bit easier to pay attention in the classroom. And this just gives me another map where I can pick some protocols. Like I said, like here it'll show you inhibit fast waves. I don't do that. But I might pick on this map, this site for Z-score training, if it correlates with behaviors. So if somebody's very withdrawn and anxious, I might use that area to train. And then another database I use is NeuroGuide. And the only reason I use NeuroGuide is because it has this brain injury and learning disability discriminant. It's not diagnostic, but I get a lot of clients in who've had multiple concussions. And so it gives you an idea of the probability that their brain activity is from concussion and how severe the concussion is. And if they haven't had a concussion, you can use it for a learning disability discriminant. There's another discriminant that you can use. But if they've had brain injury, you can't do the learning disability discriminant. So that's why I use that database. And from all that information, I decide where to train. So this is another database. This is NewMind, and I use this one. It's not my most reliable, but it's easiest for the clients to understand. So I'll give them pictures of these maps, even though they're clinical presentations, because I think they deserve to know what their brain looks like. We talk about the different parts and what might be going on.
What do you do when an individual has ADHD and they are an adult?
The ADHD and ADD that I see is not really ADHD and ADD. So I'm not a physician. I can't make a diagnosis, but there's a lot of different reasons why somebody can't pay attention. So if you've had, an undiagnosed head injury, maybe there's some functional issues associated with that. If you are very anxious, like I always talk to folks about meeting a bear in the woods. So if your brain thinks it's meeting a bear in the woods, it's either running from that bear, fighting that bear, or playing dead. it's not stopping to smell the flowers. It's not going to notice the environment around it. And so I've seen adults with high theta, and they're usually associated with head injuries. And I've seen adults that can't pay attention with high beta, but I've never seen an adult with just, high theta related to beta because they're ADD. I think ADD and ADHD are just a symptom of maybe slower developmental growth of the brain. And eventually, I think we all make it. So then this is something I look for. This is one of the other reasons I use NewMind, because I really like this. So this is a reverse alpha response, which is something I think to keep in mind as far as mind mirror when you're training alpha. So if you see somebody come in and you go, oh, you have eyes open alpha, like that's great. I don't know that it is always great. If you're trying to meditate and control that alpha, and you've gotten to the point where you are in such control of your alpha, you can keep it open and just stay calm and beautiful with your eyes open, then you've trained that into yourself. But one of the things that I look for is this reverse alpha response. So our alpha, when we close our eyes, our alpha should be higher. We open because we're paying attention to us, If we open our eyes, we should be paying attention to what's out there. So our alpha should drop when we open our eyes. People that I've seen, and this is like kind of a marker for especially childhood trauma, kids that have a reverse alpha response, so their eyes are open and they're making tons of alpha, and they close them and the alpha stops, which is what's going on in this client. It's usually a marker for developmental trauma. So think of it as my eyes are open and I am so overwhelmed by everything, and I'm just thinking, how is that everything out there going to affect me? So the alpha is me, and how, what out there is going to impact me. And then you close your eyes and you're not feeling you're worried about what's going on out there that you can't see. So how is what's going on out here going to hurt me? So I see that in folks with developmental trauma. So you're comparing, so the blue is alpha, and you compare it not because, okay, well, this is eyes open and, they look about the same height, but compare it to where it should be. So this is a reverse alpha response, because here you have your eyes closed and it's only about half of where it should be. Here you have your eyes open and it's pretty high up there.
This makes where it jives with mind mirror is that in terms of alpha blocking, that bridge will collapse when the person is invited to face what's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've seen alpha, as I'm training, because I'm not training alpha, I'm not asking them to increase their alpha. So I've seen when they're ready, when their brain is ready to finally let go of that alpha blocking on its own, because I'm asking it like, hey, can you get some of these towards that center? I've seen it disappear, absolutely disappear. I had one guy just this week who was, his parents always wanted him to be perfect. And his mom told him, don't come back and see me until you're clean and you're sober. And in that time, his mom died. And so he didn't get to see her when he went back. And he was really wrestling with the fact that he didn't get clean and sober while she was alive. And just bringing that up, the alpha, boom, just shot up. That deficit just disappeared. But it wasn't something he had faced until then. I had one African-American man whose mom was white, but the dad left her. And so she was very prejudiced against Black men. And so he never admitted that he was biracial. And so as I'm training him, he started to cry. And he realized kind of who he was. So, you know, the neurofeedback's powerful. The very first thing that I always see change, and it's usually right after the very first session. So what I do is I leave that cap on after I have the map, and I train all 19 sites to see how tired that brain is going to get from training, to see which areas are going to show their tiredness first, to see which areas are going to kind of be recruited to help change. And after that first session, almost everybody gets sleep. Sleep comes right off the bat. And I'm not training the brain to sleep. Like if somebody says to me, oh, I can't sleep at night, that's where my way differs from somebody who trains amplitude. So I'm not saying to the brain, I'm going to train you to sleep. I just say to the brain, okay, do what you want to become more regulated. And so the brain picks sleep. Every brain picks sleep first, because that's what we need in order to do the training, you know, and that's what most of us are lacking. And then after sleep, a lot of times, if there's dietary issues, I see that. So like our basic needs, the brain takes care of first. So for instance, people that are they love their sugar, I'll see them asking for, you know, I had, like, for instance, that little girl that was my first client. She would go home, get off the bus, and ask her mom for cookies every day. And her mom said, will this change eating habits? And at this point, I didn't really know that it would. Like, I don't know what's going on. She's like, she's coming home and asking for hot dogs. And then after I trained more and more people, I noticed, hey, there's a theme here. People are wanting protein. I had one guy go home, like, I went home and I made a steak, because the brain is saying, look, you're asking me to do this work. What do I need to do this work? And you figure, what purpose does sugar serve? Well, sugar is fast energy. So if we're running or fighting, our brain is saying, hey, I'm in danger here. I need energy fast. So I see sugar cravings go away. I had one insulin dependent guy leave me not taking insulin. It was type 2 diabetes. I mean, it wouldn't help with type 1, but and then it gives me, this is kind of an interesting use of a new mind maps too. So the CEC part that you see there that's a self-report that the clients give me. So they fill out all kinds of information for me about different behaviors, different signs and symptoms that they have. And then I match that to what the EEG is telling me. And then that gives me a good place to start training. And it also tells me how well the clients know themselves. So you see, like this socially inappropriate, like the EEG and the client are both saying, yeah, that's me. And this is just more of them. And then here's that theta beta ratio in numbers. So that's the thing, they say, like, that's really the only thing that's diagnostic about the map is that theta beta ratio, and that's classic ADD.
Is that saying that there's 1.92 theta to 1 beta?
Right.
Or vice versa?
And that's right. And that's in the normal range.
We consider that pretty good for mind mirror.
Yeah.
There was an earlier question. Somebody wanted to know that when you keep that cap on in the first session, the question was, what are you training?
I am training 50% of all brain activity to go towards that Z-score center. So of the whole brain, which you would think, oh my gosh, he's asking my brain to do a lot of stuff. But a lot of the stuff is going to be easy, because it's like asking a kid, you have a kid that you give 10 jobs to and you say, do 5 jobs. Okay, so the kid's going to pick the 5 easiest jobs to do, right? So in a way, I'm asking the brain to do a lot of stuff, but the brain can pick, okay, these are the easiest ones for me, which I think is one of the reasons sleep comes. But when I'm training after the map, like any subsequent trainings, I use wires and I use my protocols. So I've picked areas that I say to the brain, hey, could you regulate this a little bit better? So I'm picking the areas where there's behavioral symptoms. So even though the brain's asked to do less work, it's kind of like saying to a kid, okay, I'm giving you 3 jobs and now you have to do 2 of them. So here's the bell curve. Think of a z-score of 0. You have 60% of the population right under the middle. And I'm asking them to go towards that middle. They don't even have to get there, but they get rewarded anytime 50% are going towards that middle. Okay? So if you are a musician and your right parietal and right central areas are way out there, you're not going to touch those. You use those. So they don't have to go towards that z-score. Does that make sense?
No.
So
And I think,
let's say I have a z-score of 4.0 in my, I don't know, in my left frontal beta, okay? And I am a stock market analyst. Well, my brain made that because all I see is numbers. I can make patterns out of numbers no matter what. So my brain's not going to move that. And I don't want to move that. You have some savants that are really good at just memorizing numbers. We don't want to get rid of those. So because your brain is choosing which one it gets to move, it's not going to touch those that are benefiting you.
Yeah, so you're saying that the brain knows what's out of order, what's disordered, what's incoherent.
Right, it knows what serves it. So that's why neurofeedback sticks. That's why once you do these patterns, they stick, because they're getting rewarded when that client and that brain leave my office and they're interacting in the world, their new behaviors are going to get rewarded. So those behaviors will stick, which is why it made some of those aberrant brainwaves to begin with. That's why that analyst has those good brainwaves in the left frontal area, because hey, he's good at his job, and he got promoted because so that's why they're stuck there, because in the real world they're getting operantly conditioned to keep those.
And so some fundamental questions that'll help us non-neurofeedback people understand this better. A z-score, this is a normative database?
Yes.
Okay, and so it has to do then with amplitudes and frequency, the amplitudes of different frequencies in various locations of the brain?
Yes.
And so this bell curve, is this a normative bell curve or a bell curve that's applies to this one person?
Nope, this is a normative bell curve. And all of the different databases that I use have like different what do you call, populations, different how big their pool of data is. Yeah, they all have different sample sizes. In fact, there's some, I think, out of, who has the biggest sample size is North Korea, because they do z-score. I mean, they do EEGs on everybody.
That's
so I know the
scary.
folks at Brainmaster have been to North Korea and talked with the folks that do I'm not sure if they do neurofeedback or they just get EEGs on everybody, quantitative EEGs.
And so to continue with this, try to understand what we're actually seeing here. I understand that the z-scores, well, I understand that there are norms for which amplitudes, for which frequencies, and which parts of the brain. But so this curve is saying that And I also understand that sometimes you focus on specific areas if it turns out to be behaviors or trauma or something like
Right.
that. But so what do you actually set for the audio feedback to get them into, say, the 68% segment of this bell curve? I mean,
Well, I don't necessarily even want them in the 68%. I want at any one time 50% traveling through that Z-score. Okay, so for instance, right now, maybe somebody's picking high beta on the right frontal, you know, right F3 or F4, and they're going to move that one. Maybe in a split second from now, they're going to move another Z-score more towards that center area. So I only want 50% moving towards that. And what that's doing is kind of getting the brain unstuck, making it more flexible. But it's not just amplitude, and it's not just frequency, it's also that coherence. So how much so that's Z-scored as well. So how much are these two areas talking, and should they be talking that much? You know, hey, maybe you're using these two areas kind of like one area, you know, maybe you've had a head injury here and like this one's kind of taken over. So, and it's also phase. So phase, I kind of equate with speed of the brain, but it's not exactly speed. And I think I may have pictures of that as well. So think of phase as when this area is at a peak. Is this area at a peak too, or is the peak coming before it, or is the peak coming after it? So even though it's not exactly speed, it's correlative to speed. So all of those are Z-scored. So the brain can use any of that information to decide what it's going to move.
so would this relate to the mind mirror in the sense that you could have a split alpha, say where the peak is at 12.5 in the left brain and it's at 9 in the right brain, or even 10.5 in the right brain? And
Right,
so what you want to do is get those
as
guys
it's traveling. Yeah.
Yeah, so you want those guys to move more into phase with each other so that they're firing simultaneously and in the right amplitude and equal amplitudes.
Not necessarily. I mean, sometimes you don't want them firing. I mean, you want that information to travel. When you're talking across the hemispheres, yes, they both want to get, you know, in a coherent, nice coherent brain where you're using your whole brain to think, function optimally. Yes, they would want to fire together. But let's say you had an area here and an area here, that information's traveling. So you wouldn't necessarily want these two areas getting that information at the same time. You know, I see something, I judge, is it a threat? I smell something, I judge, is it a threat? So you don't want those two areas getting the same information at the same time. You want it to travel. So you can use different parts of your brain to interpret that information.
Aside from that first time when you have the 19 electrode cap on, then you decide based on all these different databases which areas need attention. So then you would just focus an electrode here and here or wherever it needs to be. So then it could be how many electrodes? I mean, maybe one, maybe three, maybe all 19?
I usually I like to start out with 6 or 8, because then I'm giving the brain more of a choice. Also, the software that I use, if I use 6, I get a live map, so I can see what the brain's doing in real time. As I'm more fine tuning, if I get a place that's stuck, you know, like I'm still having trouble, you know, remembering names, you know, we might go down to 2, but that's very rare. Usually the brain is really good at fixing dysregulated brain waves if I just leave it pick. And I don't usually ever pick F1 and F2 because there's a lot of artifact there. So I have another way to train neurofeedback, and I'll show you that at the end, to train F1 and F2, to train like that impulsivity. And I use that a lot with our guys up at the lodge. Impulsivity, planning, and organization.
What software do you mostly use for your brain training? Ken Sherman wants to know.
BrainMaster, just because that's the one I started off with Thought Technology, and BrainMaster has more flexibility.
And so here's maybe this is a weird question. When you have 6 or 8 electrodes on somebody's head, how does the software know when to give an audio cue that then reinforces?
So it's not, I have a sample of the audio. So it's not just a yes or a no, it's a series of notes. And I'll play that audio for you. As they're training, they're playing games. So I have, the kids like to drive, the adults like carnival. Kids want to be adults and adults want to be kids. So this is a sample of the sound that they're hearing. So the games are not training them. The games are providing a little bit of feedback for them, like, okay, so your brain is getting it right. This is how it feels when your brain is getting it right. But the games are also providing instances for that person to create different brain states. So some of the games are really frustrating. I want them to get frustrated, because then the brain's learning, hey, this is not helping me. Okay, I have one really crazy, it's just such a simple game. It's a little animal. You can't even tell what kind of animal it is. It's a cartoon animal. Maybe, I don't know, it might be a squirrel, I don't know. And then on a string is a little nut. And the idea is to get the nut over to the animal and feed the animal the nut. And every time you feed a couple of nuts, they get surprised because the animal gets like a hat or a pair of shoes. But the whole time this string is going over towards the animal gets happier and happier. As the nut's moving away, the animal's getting sadder and sadder. So it's really frustrating. They get the nut almost there, and then they get some performance anxiety because, oh gosh, I want to really give that animal a nut. And so the anxiety moves them back. The animal gets sad, and now they're feeling like they disappointed this animal. And it's really, really an effective game. That's my favorite game. And it's really frustrating for them, and they see that come on, they're like, oh no. But eventually they learn to get over that performance anxiety and kind of I always tell them, just imagine that animal eating. Not that you're trying, that you're allowing. So this is the sound that they're hearing. You hear it?
Loud and clear.
So each one of those individual sounds are any of those metrics moving towards that central Z-score. So as I'm training, especially when we first start out, you'll hear real chaotic, disconnected sounds because the brain doesn't know what it's supposed to do. It's just learning. It moves a little bit and then it gets a sound. It's like, hey, it realizes I'm the one that made that sound. And then in the middle of a training, we start to get a nice connected sound where, it's not so disjointed. Towards the end of a training, what I'll hear is burst of sound, nothing. Burst of sound, nothing. And I equate it with the brain knows what to do. It just runs out of energy to do it. So like I tell them, it's like lifting those last couple weights at the gym. You get it up and then, oh God, but when you're in the middle of your workout, it's pretty easy. And then suddenly those last couple, it's just really hard to continue. The more sounds and the higher pitched, because as they're getting more of them, the sound gets higher pitched. This is a live map. So this is what I get as they're training. Now, live maps are not the most reliable because there's a lot of artifact in there, especially as you're training, you know, frontal lobes. So this is, you know, you see a lot of high delta, or a lot of high theta. You see that, and some. So this is the sum of like the whole map. This is high beta. This is gamma. This is that amplitude asymmetry. So kind of that coherence across hemispheres that we're talking about. The second line down, this is coherence. And that's where, you know, I said, like, I was doing that little girl and her, this map looked beautiful, but I came down here and it was completely redded out. The whole map was red. And then this is that phase that I talked about. It's kind of like speed, but not exactly. So it's like when one area is peaking, is another area peaking. An interesting thing I see in phase as I'm training is I see, I mean, usually I don't see a lot of initial disruptions in phase. I have seen it in folks diagnosed with Asperger's, interestingly enough. But as I'm training, I see low phase pop up. My interpretation for that is brain cells that fire together wire together. And so we're making new connections because they're new, they're slower. The brain's not used to those as much. And also they're not myelinated. You know, they say it takes 6 to 8 weeks to start myelinization. So they're going to go slower. And so I'll see them pop up. Sometimes I'll get blue lines in that third, you know, some blue lines here, some blue lines here. And then as we're training, the blue lines go away. So I like to see them. When I see those blue lines, I get excited. This was during a training. So this was a before and an after, like after 20 minutes. And that was the initial training. And you see what happened here? They're getting tired. They're getting tired. Their brain is asking for sleep. That's at delta. But we lost all that high beta. You know, that shrunk. So that was one session after 20 minutes. So the default on the system is a 20-minute session. I don't go by the default. I plug somebody in and I can tell by the sound when they're getting tired. Like I said, you'll hear those bursts down to nothing. They also tell me as I'm training them, I tell them on a scale of 0 to 10, tell me how tired they are. When they get to 7 or 8, I usually call it a day. So at first, sometimes they'll only train for 12, 17 minutes because that's all their brain can do initially. As we get along in the training and the pattern becomes easier, sometimes they'll train for 45 minutes. If they have it at 45 minutes and they're not getting tired, their brain's pretty much got it. So I train twice a week. Once they're training, the behaviors are stable, the map looks good, I go to once a week. If, you know, everything's cool in between sessions, I go to once every 2 weeks. If they've got it for 2 weeks, their brain has that pattern down. And so we call it quits. But I will tell them, like, if you have a big stressor, sometimes I'll get kids in college that are going through finals, or, you know, and that'll stress them out. And sometimes I'll get a phone call like, hey, I'm having a little trouble sleeping. So I bring them in. Usually 1 or 2 sessions reminds the brain where it should be. I've had it like people, like the anniversary of their divorce or somebody's death, you know, as when the patterns are still pretty fresh. But the longer we get away from training, the more ingrained they become. So like 5 years down the road, you know, they're not going to go back on the anniversary of somebody's death. But maybe that initial 6 months, a year, sometimes the holidays. That's funny because around the holidays, the kids' maps look better and the adults' map looks worse.
We feel that. We all know it.
And I think this was the third map from that series. So this guy's really tired. Well, another thing that happens before I get these maps is, as I'm telling if somebody's tired, brain injuries, if they've had a traumatic brain injury, they will go from 0 to like 9 in a blink of an eye. And then they might start to get a headache. So that's another reason why I don't train like the standard 20 minutes. Because I don't want them, leaving there feeling worse than they came in. And then I get symptom trackers. So they rate these. These are self-rated. We go through them together at the end of every session. So this was, how is your motivation? And 10 is like, it's the worst. It's a problem all the time. And it doesn't go down to 0. They won't let me, the software won't let me put 0 in. So 1 is, it's never a problem. So these were pain and physical discomfort and motivation and energy. And it's never, I always tell them, like, we're not going to have a straight path up. Things aren't going to be always progressing in a positive manner because life affects you, so you're going to have stressors that are going to say to your brain, whoa, that's too much energy you're using with these new patterns. And I liken it to if you have a toddler that just learned to use the toilet and you bring a baby into the house, they're going to regress to needing diapers again. So, you have somebody that's just making these brain changes and they have a big stressor, their brain's going to shift back a little bit. So this was difficulty falling asleep and impulsivity. And that was from, looks like, over a period of 2 months.
How often do you ask them to fill out these questionnaires?
It depends on the client. Some of them are a little overwhelmed at first with doing it. So maybe once every 2 or 3 sessions. Maybe one, if they like to tell me about it, maybe once every session.
Did you create the questionnaires, or is this part of?
There are some patterns some tracking you can pick, and then you can add your own. Like I had one kid with Asperger's, 19 years old, who bounced a ball. He took the ball with him everywhere, and that was how he kind of voiced his anxiety. So he would bounce this ball all the time. And so I put in there a tracker, how often are you bouncing the ball? How much is about ball bouncing a problem? And the ball bouncing stopped in 2 sessions, but then he started to pace. Well, pacing is a little bit more socially acceptable than a 19-year-old carrying a ball around. So we were okay with the pacing, and then pacing eventually died off. But, it was a good shift from the ball to the pacing. So, we were all happy with that. He was happy, his parents were happy. I was happy seeing that.
Fantastic.
And then these are comments that this client gave me. And this was one of the guys in the recovery. And then I put this map in because you look at that map and I'm like, oh gosh. So my first thought I think of when I see a blue map is metabolic problems, toxins, head injuries, like what's going on that isn't giving this brain enough energy to do what it needs to do. So that's my first thought. So what do you guys think might be wrong with this brain? Sleep is one.
Unconscious.
Usually sleep, you'll see higher delta because the brain wants it, but the beta won't let it have it.
Unmute and guess. Reduced blood flow, says Ken Sherman.
That's an interesting thought. That could be. This was a really simple fix for this guy.
We plugged him in.
Well, I've done that sometimes too. And they'll say to me, like, don't we need this wire hooked up? Yeah, we do. Or I forgot a wire. So this guy, he was a 20-something year old man who had gastric bypass. And so he probably had some malabsorption symptoms going on. He was a guy from the lodge too that had addiction disorder. But He was drinking a lot of coffee in the morning, which was kind of weird because normally in coffee you'd see some high beta. He just didn't have the energy to even make the high beta. He was dehydrated. The coffee's a diuretic, and he wasn't drinking any water, just coffee. He was peeing out all his foods. So that's the first time I saw a map. I'm looking that bad just from dehydration. So I think that's
Amazing.
kind of crazy.
But it really makes sense, doesn't it? Because water enables the cells to do the electrical activity that runs the entire body.
Yeah. So it was dehydration. And this is his map after we got him hydrated a little bit. So this was even like, that's not from training. That is what his map looked like when I said, you know what, you need to drink more water and stop drinking the coffee. So that's what he did. And then you can see that high frontal beta, little bit low in the alpha and a little bit low in the slower waves too. He was on a med that did that, Stratera. And then that bottom one is what his map looked like after. Yeah, but I thought that was like crazy. I've never seen a map look quite that bad from dehydration. Sometimes I'll see, I'll have them drink some water when they come in my office because the kids have been going all day at school and haven't had anything to eat or drink. So I'll have them have a snack to get that blood sugar up so they can work and a drink, but never saw that blue of a map from anything else. And then these are changes over, you can see the dates there, how the map was changing. And sometimes different areas of the map get worse before they get better, as that brain is making, kind of learning to balance its resources. So that's why I said when I train 19 channels at first, I like to see who's going to be used to kind of help balance those resources. Which sites are they going to borrow energy from to correct other areas? And then this is a comparative map. So you see we had a 49% change, and I think that was the map before. So over sessions, I don't usually get a second QEEG map on folks after training, but this person, I wasn't sure quite where to go because we still had some symptoms. And so I did get a second map, but I think this was like after 20 sessions, and we had a 49% change. And you can see that high beta really shrunk. And usually I'll see beta come down before I see, like, oops, for instance, alpha go up. This was that little girl that I told you about. So this is coherence, that little girl that had her whole brain was firing at once. So white is even higher than red. Red is high, but white is even higher. And we just, like, her whole brain is just firing at one time. And then this was after a month's time. The brain learned, like, hey, I can be a little more discriminate in where I'm sending this information. And as this is changing, she was becoming more verbal, and she stopped peeing her pants, and she was having conversations. This little girl, the school was not serving her very well, and she was quite a problem in the classroom because her needs weren't being met. And so what they would do with her is send her out to gym 7 days a week, or send her with the janitor to learn life skills. Well, she hated gym. And because she was nonverbal, she would go to the gym and act out in gym class. Well, about 3 sessions into training, she took her sneakers and she put them in the toilet. And her mom and I cheered her on because that was her finally her way of expressing, look, I don't belong here, and what you're doing isn't right. And her mom, after we stopped and she was making real progress, her mom called me one day and she said she was driving and she had to pull over because the school called her, and she sent me a picture. She got second honors, and it's the little girl holding her certificate of second honors. So she sent it to me. And then,
Yeah,
so what's that?
couple questions for you, Paula. Ken says that he's found that there's not always a direct relationship between symptom improvement and map improvement. There certainly was in that little girl,
Right.
but have you observed this as well?
Right. Sometimes the maps look worse, not usually at the end, but especially during training, sometimes the maps will look worse in one area or another. As the brain is allocating resources, some areas might have to be recruited to kind of pick up the slack. Sometimes, especially in head injuries, you are asking that brain to do something it's not structurally able to do. And so it may be recruiting another area to do that job. So yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes the maps I don't see that progression, like you do in behavior. So this is other type of biofeedback I do, because neurofeedback is a form of biofeedback. So for those frontal lobes that I told you I don't train with the Z-score neurofeedback, I use this passive infrared system. And what that trains is it's an infrared light that picks up temperature changes by the blood flow in the frontal lobes. So essentially increasing metabolism of the frontal lobes. And I use that for folks with frontal lobe dysfunction, those people that just can't stop their impulses. And, there's part of that is related to that anxiety too, because, when you're anxious, your brain decides this area is not as important to supply with resources because you're not going to reason with the bear. So a lot of times that will resolve itself even before I get to that as the anxiety resolves. I do heart rate variability on every single person that comes in my office. I used to call it going in through the back door of the brain, and I think it's more important than that. I think, it's just as important than the neurofeedback itself, because I'm helping that vagal tone and quiet in that autonomic nervous system. I do EMG. That's more for, people with muscular aches and pains, neck tension. I use it, headaches. I use the passive infrared for headaches too, because a lot of times migraineurs will have sudden drops in the prefrontal cortex metabolism. And then as the blood flow comes back, the headache comes on. And then the skin conductance and temperature. I don't use those as much as like the heart rate variability. Everybody gets it. That's their homework. And it really makes a difference. I can tell when they've done their homework. One little boy I had, his parents had been married for 15 years and thought they would like to adopt a child. And I'm not exactly sure how they ended up with two prepubescent boys. And I think they weren't prepared for these two little guys. And so they had to stay in their rooms until like 9:30 on summer days. And they both were showing signs of just anxiety and trauma. And so I taught them to do this heart rate variability. And the mom is really the one who needed training. That was another instance where, the moms really can have an impact on the kids. And I did try to push her to do the heart rate variability. But the one little boy came in the one day and I said, wow, look at your waveforms. They're beautiful. You must have really been practicing. And he said, I do it in my room before I'm allowed out. So, and it was having an impact on him. So that is all I've got. I do use the mind mirror meditations. That was kind of a surprise to me. So I met with Judith and wanted to do mind mirror just for my own brain fun. That was going to be my fun part of neurofeedback and just learning about the different states of consciousness. And then I got a call to work at this inpatient treatment facility. And one day, I don't even know how it started. They asked me, could I run a meditation? And I did the animal meditation. And the things that came out of these guys, some of them couldn't do it at first because they have such high beta, but the revelations that I've had from these guys during the mind mirror meditations have been incredible. So now I run a weekly meditation with them. I had one young man saw himself as a dog, and I said, well, any specific breed of dog? He said, no, I was a specific dog. I know which dog I was. And I said, well, you know, tell me about your dog. He said, I was my uncle's dog. And he said, my uncle's dog bit my cousin, and he was a really good dog, but they put him down. And he said, I was that dog, and my family was standing around me deciding to put me down. And I wanted to say to them, I'm not that bad a dog. So that was, you know, but that the kind of stuff that they revealed to me helps then therapeutically in counseling. I had one guy who was adopted at age 4 from Russia, and he couldn't do the meditation in the big group while I was working with him. So I took him to my office and I did the inner child meditation with him. And he saw himself, he went back to his Russian orphanage and he saw the clothes that he left Russia in. He saw the only toy that he had with him in Russia. And he said, he explained to him, he sat down in dirt and he ran the truck with the little boy. And he explained to him that he was going with a family and this was going to be his new family now and he was going to be okay. And he said, no one ever told him that because there was a language barrier and no one ever explained to him where he was going when he left with these people leaving Russia. So that was pretty impressive. And I just this past, maybe 2 weeks ago, I had one guy who he did the animal meditation the first time he was there, the first week he was there, and he was a bird of prey, but he was pecking at himself. And right before he left, he was a bird of prey and he was flying with other birds of prey and they were soaring. So I'll leave it at that because that's a good story.
That's a great story. Absolutely great. I think that there are a couple of questions in chat, so I'll go to those first, and then we'll let people just unmute and ask questions. One person wanted to know, have you simultaneously monitored a CAP with an awakened mind pattern on the Mind Mirror 6?
I haven't, I don't know that I could do that because we've got the cap on, and then how do, like, because the cap is in the same place as where your wires would be.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I would be able to do that.
Yeah, I don't think you could either. That would be, if you were to do it on a cap, then Steve Clark at Ballistas would have to extract, I think, the readings from those 4 places. But that's not so easy because you're doing a monopolar hookup so that you're site-based, and ours is bipolar, which is an area. Right. So
right, so there'd be no way to well, you know, through coherence, but not amplitude, we couldn't compare it.
Right, but you couldn't have the 2 systems on at once, probably.
I've already discussed this with someone else that does neurofeedback, and they say there's no problem. They would be willing to do it.
How would they do it?
Well, they would have to have the mind mirror, and they feed the EEG through the mind mirror. They're, you know, our usual hookup. Plus, they're also monitoring other areas. They're not necessarily hooked up on the cap back here. They have the EEG, the mind mirror EEG, hooked up in the usual places, but then they're monitoring other areas of the brain to see where the activation actually is and mapping the brain that way. You know, Swingle on the Q, if you've ever used a Swingle Q before, he uses only 6 electrodes. And
right, he does the mini Q, so he does
a mini Q, yeah. Right. But he uses an O1 where you could use O1 and O2 at the same time with T3, T4, and then, but he likes to use F1, F2, but I would prefer to use like PC and AC hookup. in that way to monitor the cingulate. But you know, I mean, that can be done. And what I've really been interested in is whether or not, you know, what does an awakened mind pattern look like in terms of the overall pattern of the brain and activation of different areas of the brain, say on a Z.
So I did have one lady come to my office she does tuning with forks, and she sees angels and channels. And what I saw in her was an incredibly high amount of gamma temporally and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like it's a conduit, you know, like your brain is a conduit.
Yeah, it's long.
It was definitely an interesting pattern.
Did you check her for ACE scores, adult, you know, adverse childhood experiences? Because I find that people who are psychic are frequently have very high ACE scores.
No, I didn't, but that's interesting. Yeah.
That would make sense that you saw that much activity in the temporals, because spiritual connection is associated with the temporal lobes, which is one of the reasons I'm so happy that we are measuring on the temporal lobes.
So the other thing that BrainMaster does, and this was kind of interesting too. So I went into that S. Loretta where it sees deeper where this pattern is coming from. And she did have a spot in an area in the left occipital region. It's called Herschel's gyrus, which is inner voice. And it, you know, like where your inner voice comes from. So I don't know what that meant, but that was high in either high beta or gamma as well.
It's interesting that you're using a BrainMaster, because Tom Kalur was working with Anna on the Mind Mirror 4 and with the BrainMaster.
With gamma.
Yeah, he called it the Brain Mirror.
So if you talk about gamma too much in neurofeedback circles, you get kind of the side eye, because they say, oh, well, it's artifact, or, you know, is it real? And, you know, I've seen it enough times when people have had those aha moments in the office, you know, like, oh gosh, I had one addict say to me, I was my mother, you know, like he was traumatized by his mother's alcoholism, and he started crying. He's like, I become my mother, and his gamma surged. You know, the gamma is real. It's not muscle artifact. And this angel lady that I talked about, so I did her map before she channeled and after she tuned with these forks. And there was a 20% change in the map just in a matter of like 5-10 minutes. So something happened from that.
What was she doing with the tuning forks?
She uses them to get people into altered states. She has a series of forks that she brought other clients to my office and did it to them, and we measured changes. They're just tuning forks that she uses, she says, to increase vibrations in these people.
Does she hold them near their ears or place them on the skull in any way?
She was holding them for her ears. Sometimes she surrounded them with them, like in a kind of a circle pattern.
Okay.
But she asked me to map her. I said, sure, because I was curious, you know.
Okay. We've done that with a didgeridoo.
What's
we monitored a whole group of people.
Yeah.
While they were being played the didgeridoo, and they all went into nice patterns, didn't they?
Really, that's neat. I just read this week that you know, if you're teaching heart rate variability, you have a resonance frequency between 4.5 hertz and 6.5 hertz, where that is supposed to be your optimal function and your most vagal tone. And I read that Buddhist prayer, that Om Mani Padme, that actually puts your breath rate at 5.5. And so does there's one, is it Saitenama? Saitenama, that puts your breath.
Satanama. Yeah, Satanama.
That puts your breath breath at 5.5. And also the Hail Mary, like in the Catholic Church, the Hail Mary started off by the lector or by the priest, and then the response that the congregation does, put your breath at 5.5. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, amazing. I was wondering if Judith had, when you're talking about traveling waves, what I've often thought was that the awakened mind pattern, if it's a good pattern, is just a standing wave. But what we do with Perla's pattern, that we do see, you know, this increase in amplitude, not necessarily forward and backward in the brain, but an increase in amplitude that indicates that there is some sort of traveling wave going on. But also we see a rotational pattern, again with amplitude and not with location, of where you get, you know, an amplitude flare on one side and then on the other, and then on the other, and then on the other, and then down that way, and then back up again.
Like traveling through the cingulate.
Yes, back and forth.
Wow.
So, you know, but that pattern is just in amplitudes and not in location. So it's hard to say exactly what's happening there in terms of the overall.
Location is just left-right hemisphere.
Right, it's just a left-right hemisphere, but it's not a location in terms of moving from the front to the back or the back to the front.
Well, Joy points out that you could just do a cap on someone who's good at achieving an awakened mind pattern. And I've long had that in mind because we claim that the awakened mind is a pattern of flow, and we can't actually see that because we're measuring on the back of the head.
Right, but how would we know that it was an awakened mind pattern if we're not running it through a mind mirror at the same time simultaneously? We need to correlate the two.
Well, I'm not as concerned about correlating the two as seeing what someone who can produce an awakened mind pattern is going to look like on a cue. The only thing I wonder about, and this is why I'm bringing this up again, is there are going to be individual differences, aren't there? So what if I'm crazily practicing piano, which I am at the moment, and then say Joy is crazily working on her neurofeedback certification and using a lot of, you're still going to see hot spots in the brain, won't you? So there will be individual differences, even if we're producing in the back of the head the same awakened mind pattern at 99% on training level 5.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that you don't know they're in an awakened mind pattern unless you're actually feeding it through the mind mirror.
Yeah, but you know, I can tell you, I know when I'm in an awakened mind. I can almost tell you the
good.
numbers.
I agree with you, Judith. You know, you're probably very good at it, but it's not going to make a paper that you can publish.
Well, I don't want to publish a paper. I just want to see.
The cue is not that moment in time though either. So the cue is all that information from the start of the eyes closed to the end of the eyes closed, all correlated into one map. So I think you would have to do a live map with the cap on.
Exactly.
Yeah, you couldn't use a cue, I don't think.
Yeah, no, the cue wouldn't work. We have to do a live mapping. You know, you can say, oh, I think I'm in an awakened mind pattern. That's not good enough for me.
Or for others.
Or for others. Or for people who don't even know what an awakened mind pattern is.
Well, I mean, it's simple enough to hook up to the mind mirror and produce an awakened mind and sustain it and then go to the cap.
That's what I'm saying, is we need to do that. Plus, you know, have some overall mind mapping to see where the different areas, and it's, as you say, it's going to be different for people in terms of the areas that are activated. But it would be also interesting to see what areas are activated while they're in an awakened mind pattern.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm after. This is a real big missing piece for us. It is. And, you know, I think that mainly I need to say, as far as things in the chat before we go on and open to questions, is that everyone is loving this presentation and thinks it's brilliant and excellent. And thank you for your kind generosity of sharing. And there are lots of comments like that. But I guess, you know, one question that somebody asked early on was, With this form of neurofeedback, you're working on basically pathology, and we're working on meditation and consciousness training. But given that, considering that, what sorts of similarities have you seen? Where do we meet? Where do these two different modalities meet? And what commonalities do we share?
I think they're both making the brain more flexible, more adaptable, because anytime you get away from pattern that you're used to doing, you're learning new information, right? So, I mean, even if you go to the same restaurant and have the same meal every time you go there, and now you try something else, your brain is having a new experience. So I think anytime you move the brain away from any pattern that it's used to doing and ask it to try something different, and it doesn't have to be through neurofeedback. It could be, learning a new language, taking a new route to work, looking at the world from a different vantage point. I think that's a commonality, right?
Optimizing, you could just say, optimizing.
And even just understanding where your brain is at the moment can get you to not be there at that moment.
Somebody said, Kali says that he and Prem ran a meditation training a couple of months ago using Awakened Mind protocols, also using audio brain entrainment. We tried to customize people's practice based on surveys. One of our participants kept on falling asleep using the Theta entrainment, who had an old diagnosis of ADHD. He was a bit unsure of what training to suggest. Any ideas?
Maybe he needed that sleep. Maybe that's finally when his brain kind of let go of that high beta. And so that's what his brain was asking for. Like I would say the majority of the guys at the residential treatment program, the first week, maybe the second week that I do meditation, they fall asleep. But they've all come in reporting to me that they have insomnia. So they're sleeping away like the rest of the guys are talking about what they saw in meditation. And I'm a happy camper because, finally they're getting some restorative sleep, and I just let them go. And eventually, once the brain catches up with that sleep, then they're able to go into that meditative state. But I think initially, the brain gets what the brain wants. So I wouldn't necessarily even try to train that theta, or delta and theta away. I would let them sleep.
Yeah, or hold a glass of water. That will keep the ego awake. I mean, we do have a self-training solution. Paula's saying let them sleep, but if in Awakened Mind training our goal is to have people not sleep through a meditation, then one solution would be with the self-training program to train them on alpha synchrony, which would keep them at a peak alpha frequency of 10.5, closer to waking awareness than to theta non-conscious state. That could be a possibility.
But maybe they need to go through that sleep state before they can get to, maybe we're kind of putting the cart before the horse. Like maybe they have to get restorative sleep before they can go into an awakened mind pattern.
Right. It could be. That's the virtue of working one-on-one with people rather than a group, because then you could always say, and you are becoming more consciously aware, and then they'll wake up a little bit or they won't. And so then you can determine whether they need to be non-conscious or not. Prem, I think you were going to say something else. You had other questions?
I really was just going to add to probably what you just said, Judith. I certainly, with falling asleep, and I've been meditating for about 20 years, but when I first began, I would fall asleep a lot. And then I did a lot of mindfulness practice, and then, but I'd still fall asleep. And then when I started doing the Awakened Mind practices, increasing my alpha made a massive difference. And using the I call them the alpha hacks, but basically just centralizing. When I centralize, I notice that I'm actually able to stay conscious to what's occurring, the sensations, the imagery that are coming to me. I'm not getting knocked out by it. So it's a curious one, the piece around sleep. And we were curious though, because this gentleman said he had had an ADHD diagnosis. We were wondering which is what Carly just asked, do you actually train more beta? Because, it seemed that his theta was too high. I was curious about that, but you actually just asked that, Carly, about beta.
I mean, I would think that if they have not much beta to start with and a lot of theta to start with, then there would be a much greater potential for someone to fall asleep. But this brings up a really interesting question, and I'll just comment on it for a minute. I don't see any other question. Yeah, one more we'll come to. So this morning, I've been doing these Dawson Church meditations. It's a series of 21 meditations, each relegated to or categorized in different neurotransmitters. And I've been doing them pretty constantly, well, every day. I'm probably on 15 by now. And so there's been a cumulative effect of meditating hooked up for 20 minutes every morning. And then I started not minding the constant talking, because he's having to tap, and I want to go into the experience and stay there like we do with the awakened mind, but he's talking and got you moving. So I finally habituated to his talking and learned to phase it out, and found that his instructions of feeling unconditional love from someone else or from a higher being, or and sending unconditional love, that was putting him in a really deep state. And so I started being more aware of where is the line of consciousness. And this is something that we pay attention to in awakened mind training, because there's a line, typically for most people, it's right down the middle of alpha. And above alpha, you're awake. Above that line, you're awake. Below that line, you're non-conscious. But what I noticed was that as these meditations grew steadily more powerful for me, especially over the past 3 days, that I was dropping into a trance, almost a disembodied trance. And the imagery was so strong, so powerful. Sometimes that I couldn't grasp it. And it had to do with third eye openings and moving energy and stuff, and really powerful imagery, important things for me to see. And so what Paul is saying there, I hear you, is that sometimes when people will, as I did and just described, will drop down into an almost non-conscious state, and that theta will increase, that's when you're connecting with your essential being, and that's when the information from the field. I mean, I had literally spirit transmissions of material this morning. So when you're down there, whether you're conscious or not, that's when you'll make that connection. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily train them up, except for the situation you said, Prim, where you don't want to fall asleep in meditation. So let's see, have you seen the QEEG pattern on someone in ketosis, such as in, out of control diabetes? So you're still here, Doug? Yeah, you want to just ask that question and maybe clarify that a little?
Situations where you're looking at the possibility of toxins and so forth in the pattern, and those patterns without much activity. Somebody asked about oxygen deprivation. And I just wondered if there's any patterns that you've seen that might correspond with different metabolic issues.
So
one of the thoughts that came to mind was somebody who's no longer running on glucose, let's say, but they're metabolizing ketones and ketosis, as can happen in diabetes.
I've seen people with high sugars with diabetes, and their brains are pretty much on fire. So it's a lot of activity, especially in the higher frequencies. I haven't seen anybody like with heavy metals or anything. I've seen as the sugar gets more regulated, I've seen that activity come down and be more balanced. What else have I seen? You know, what's kind of interesting is I haven't seen anybody after COVID vaccine, but I have seen kids after their regular childhood vaccines, and I've seen them after the Gardasil, the teenagers that get the Gardasil, and there's high activity, high fast activity. Not necessarily, you know, more just generalized high fast activity, not in a specific area. There's a book called The Angel and the Assassin, Angels and Assassins, about the glial cells, the microglial cells. And at first, I guess originally they thought the microglial cells weren't really very important. They were just there to clean up, kind of like the cleanup crew that would be, you know, metabolically supplying resources and cleaning up the byproducts of resources. But now they're actually thinking these are the guys that make the gamma. And they are the ones that are responsible for pruning connections and strengthening connections. I'm wondering if some of that is connected to, you know, those toxins, and especially to diabetes with the inflammation from the sugar, because sugar is an inflammatory.
Makes sense. So Nicole asks, have you ever worked with chronic fatigue syndrome?
I've had some people that probably could have gone to a physician and gotten a diagnosis of that, but not, they came into me and said, I have chronic fatigue syndrome, like I need neurofeedback for that. I haven't seen anybody.
And then Kali asks, says you described alpha as the conductor. I'm really curious about this. Why not another frequency?
We know alpha is really important because of that alpha peak frequency. So we know that that's kind of our area that is in charge of allocating resources. Am I awake or am I asleep? Am I living in this world or am I living in reality? So that's why, I think that's the conductor. I mean, you can certainly have a brain that's making high beta that's kind of ignoring the alpha, that, people don't really understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling. They're just anxious, like, an unidentifiable anxiety. So I guess in that case, like, your high beta would be your conductor, but I think the job was supposed to be relocated to alpha, but in the happy, well-functioning population.
Yeah, and I do just intuitively feel like alpha being the strongest amplitude makes it a tuner for the brain. And it's not just a bridge. I mean, that other frequencies are relating to the alpha, as in the mind mirror pattern. Alpha is the sort of the foundation of the whole. It is the foundation for the whole pattern. Certainly in the self-training program.
How everything relates to us. It makes us. So if you don't have that alpha, who are you? You kind of get lost in everybody else's frequencies.
Sensory awareness. I read in some neurofeedback book years ago that people who are substance abusers or alcoholics have very little alpha, which makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And it's funny because at the treatment facility, like, one guy gets agitated, like, I'll go in the morning and like, oh gosh, the whole house is wound up. They don't have a sense of self, like, okay, you're agitated, but it's not me. And so either everybody's depressed at the same time or everybody's anxious at the same time. They can't kind of find that sense of self.
I also read that alcohol and marijuana stimulate alpha, which explains a lot about addictions.
I had one young guy come in, and I waited till his mom went to the bathroom or went out in the hall to use the phone. And I said to him, like, the amount of alpha you're making is crazy. Like, are you sure you didn't use something lately? And so we had an agreement. Like, I wouldn't talk about it in front of his mom, but I would know when he used. And he told me he wouldn't use before sessions. And like, there was still some alpha that hung on, but I would say to him, wow, you're making a lot of alpha today. That was kind of our, like, I know what's going on with this map. And I said to him, but you want that marijuana because you're not making alpha on your own. So if we can get you to make that, it's not gonna be as attractive to you. So if you're using it, kind of what I'm doing here is a little bit of a waste of time, because I'm asking your brain to make something that a substance is already doing for you.
There is one other question someone asked. In the awakened mind world, do we ever train beta? Well, we would certainly want to train it down so it's, in ratios for the alpha and is not talking during meditation. And also, Anna talked about working with kids who had ADHD and ADD. And what she would do, because she disagreed strongly with the whole typical neurofeedback approach of squashing the theta, she would just have them, while hooked up, think about a time when they were powered on, when they were felt happy and dynamic, and that everything was right in the world. And sure enough, there would be more beta in the pattern. That little small beta compared to the theta would increase. And so then she would ask them, well, what color is that? How does that feel? Does that have a texture? Does it have a sound? And trying to get them to objectify the feeling and then string together all of those images and sensations and have them train on their own, basically, to just remember that feeling of dynamism. And she said that the kids that she worked with went from D's to A's in school, and their parents were extremely happy with her. So that is a possibility. However, I have done that, and one kid had ADHD so bad he could not sit still in the chair, and which is a question on how in the world you work with them. And then another one turned out to have, we did do the imagery stuff. And I worked with him over a long period of time, became great friends with his family, wonderful people. But he just felt more like himself, not when he was jazzed up, but rather when he was just his normal heavy duty theta self. And he ended up becoming a musician and a writer, and went through college. And as you said, Paula, he grew out of it. His beta came online when he needed it. Kept all his theta.
There's Joel Lubar, he trained ADD and ADHD kids, and he trained, this was at the very start of neurofeedback, and he trained right over that sensory motor area that I talked about. He trained 15 to 18 hertz, that SMR rhythm. And so what that trained in them, that's right over our anterior cingulate, that's our focus area. And so it's not really beta, it was actually training, high alpha. And it's also, he believed he was training an intent to stay still over the sensory motor area.
Who wants to know what? Well, Sandra Hyde wants to know all about how you got these certifications. Sandra, you can ask that question yourself. She says it's really paid off, Paula. Whatever hard work you had to do.
Paula, I've absolutely loved this. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And I've learned so much.
You're welcome. I hope it helped.
It's great. All your certifications with the different boards and also learning all the software, how long did it take you, just roundabout?
So, like the same thing I said about the Himalayan Institute, I'm kind of like, I'm the introvert's introvert. So I was very self-conscious. So I didn't want to go into a group where I didn't know what I was talking about before. So I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go into these neurofeedback groups and it's going to be all physicians and researchers and psychologists and psychiatrists. So what I did is before I went to anything, there's a Thompson book, which is like this thick, which is like kind of the neurofeedback Bible. And I got onto BCIA, it's Biofeedback Certification International Alliance, and downloaded their reading list and their requirements. And I took the test before I saw any equipment or went to any conferences or did any didactic, which is probably not the right way to do it, but it made me at least feel like, okay, I can go in with this population and sound like I know what I'm talking about. So that's what I did first. So BCIA does biofeedback certification and neurofeedback certification. The requirements are you have to take a didactic course, and then you have to do 100 sessions with a mentor. You have to do 10 sessions on yourself, which was very interesting. Just to know how your clients are going to feel when, what they're experiencing. Because the first, and I still now, like my clients will say to me things when they come back after their first session that just blow me away. So like, I guess every session I'm still you think you're sitting there listening to these sounds. How can this have any impact on, your life? And, they'll get teary-eyed during that first, maybe 6-minute session with the cap on. They'll start crying and, they'll come back. I had the best night's sleep I ever had. I haven't slept in years, like that. And so every session is kind of reinforcement that I'm on the right track. And then you have to take an exam. And then for QEEG, you have to do a didactic. You have to do so many case studies. I forget how many case studies. You have to do so many sessions with a mentor. And all of them, you have to get continuing CEs and renew your license I think it's every 3 years. But the best one that I went to was absolutely HeartMath. It just blew me away. HeartMath is their course for certification, trainer certification, just because it wasn't just clinical, it was also emotional. And so when I train heart rate variability, I train them to project. First, we do it to an animal because an animal is non-conditional, an animal or nature if they're not an animal person. So, what they do is slow their breathing down, just slower and deeper than usual. They focus their attention on their heart, imagine breath coming in and out of their heart. And then with every breath, I imagine them sending love or gratitude to an animal. Or sometimes I do just a sense of inner ease. You thought you were going to do something was going to be really hard, but it actually turned out to be easy, kind of that release you feel. So after they're able to do it successfully with an animal and we're getting nice waveforms, then I do it with a person they love, send that love and gratitude to a person. Then I do it to a person they don't like, a person that kind of, that really pushes their buttons. And lastly, I do it to themselves because that's the hardest one. I mean, people can do it to this neighbor that's constantly getting on your nerves, but they cannot send that gratitude to themselves and say, hey, I love you, thanks for being. So that's themselves always comes last because they can't do it. If I put that on first, they cannot do it. They cannot find that coherent waveform. Sometimes what I'll do it is tell them okay, it's kind of passive. If they can't do it to themselves, it's passive. So while you're sending it out there, it's coming back to you and you can't stop it.
Sounds like a wonderful training on HeartMath's part. But I think, isn't it also an element for that neurofeedback certification, or at least to get a license, that you have to, at least in the US, have an educational background or at least a bachelor's degree in health services?
So you can be a technician and not have a licensed medical degree if you work under somebody else. So anybody can do it as a technician if they're working under supervision. But you do need a license to buy Brainmasters equipment, and I think that technology too.
At one point, they were talking about letting people in who, grandfathering people who had a lot of years working with consciousness, but apparently they haven't reached that stage yet.
And I'll tell you what, like some of these folks like that are very research oriented or very clinically oriented. I mean, they can have all the certifications they want, but you need to touch these people. I mean, we're working with their minds and with their emotions and with their heart. You need to be able to know how to do that.
Doug, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did have another one, maybe two. If I understood you, Paula, correctly, you are not so much trying to actively manipulate the QEEG patterns or amplitudes, but you let the brain balance itself in your method. Is that sort of right?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting it unstuck. There used to be, I don't know if anybody remembers, there was this old game when I was a kid called Mind Master, where you had like 4 different color pegs and you had to guess which. No? Okay. So I'll use a different analogy. So remember the movie Big with Tom Hanks? So imagine somebody just standing on that piano and playing one note over and over, okay? So they're just, or 3 notes, so that you will give him a range of 3 notes. So he's only using these 3 keys. So every time he accidentally hits a key next to one of the 3 he uses, he's getting yes, he's getting like, okay, yes. And so he's trying to move, because of those yeses, we're moving him away from those 3 keys. And it's him who decides what keys he's going to go to next. I'm not forcing him. I'm just saying, hey, can you do anything besides these 3 keys? I'm just kind of giving the brain information about what it's doing, and I'm either saying yes or no. Yes with sound, or he doesn't hear no. It's like playing a game of you're getting hotter, you're getting colder, but I don't do any getting colder. We're just playing, hey, you're getting hotter.
So does that mean you would not support or be or suggest using electrical stimulation of the brain that some people use?
I've trained in it and I won't touch it. I won't touch it because, I think it's not my job to tell a brain who to be. That's more manipulative than I want to be. I have all the equipment and it's sitting in the box. I haven't even unpacked it. I went to because I was curious. And so I went to the trainings, but I don't think I don't think we know enough.
What about using audio signals like paired audio signals like hemisync? Does that drive the brain unnaturally? I think Judith is using that along with the mind mirror at Monroe Institute at this point. So I've been curious about that to try to drive hemispheric synchronization, basically.
I think it's maybe a tool for that, but in my mind, I think is it real? Because I think we're like when I think of the brain and that high beta, like, okay, I go, why do we even need that? That high anxiety. Well, we need it to protect ourselves, but why do people all have this high beta? Well, I think there's something to be said for almost going through, from developmentally, you have to kind of go through that dark night of the soul to get to that gamma, to get to go like, oh, I was so worried and upset about this, and really it doesn't matter, like somebody else is in charge. So, I think the hemisync kind of gives you a tool maybe to get there, but it's not, I hate to say it, like, is it real? Because we're not going there kind of the way that the universe intended us to get there.
Yeah, it sounds like you vote for a more organic way to get to gamma. And I kind of do too. I mean, we want to go down and build a solid scaffolding before you build up. But I will say this about Monroe is that that's what they do. They're, working with Delta and then Theta and then Alpha, and they have this. It's so orchestrated. It's amazing. Before they take
That's
people to
number
gamma.
one. I have one thing on my bucket list, and that's that's my bucket list right there, Monroe Institute.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Before they get you to the gamma, and some people have extraordinary experiences, and other people just go into regular meditation and don't respond to the gamma. So, as you say, Paul, it's really the brain's choice as to whether it's going to flow along or just take a deep dive and not catch that boat.
Paula, could you say anything about a brain's natural inclination or not towards gamma at all? I mean, are we all inclined to the same degree towards that higher frequency or transcendence, or do some people not? It doesn't mean anything. I'm curious philosophically.
Oh, geez. I don't know. I think we could all get there if we kind of get out of I think if we can almost disconnect our brain and just go from the heart. I always tell my guys, like, your brain will lie to you. Your brain is only going by what it knows from previous patterns. So can you get the brain out of the way and just lead from the heart? And then I think we're all, we can all find gamma. I think gamma is, I don't know if gamma is even from us. Is it like, is gamma just kind of we're being used in a good way? Like we're finally getting the message that we're supposed to get here. But it takes getting out of, I think first we have to find out alpha, this is who I am, and then we have to leave it go.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Thank you.
But I can add a little piece on to Doug's question, is that the thinking and research now is that everyone has the potential to have gamma, to operate on gamma, because it is associated with mental integration and super learning and things like that. So it is something to aspire to if that's what you want to do. If what you'd rather do is just, plant flowers in the backyard, you don't really need it. Unless you want an extraordinary experience of the dirt and the flower colors and such, thus and such. But it's also true that nobody's said this, of course, we're the only ones who would know, but gamma is associated with the aha experience. And my theory is that gamma has actually been operating on top of that awakened mind aha before we could see the gamma. And I see it all the time, that the gamma comes in, bam, they move into an awakened mind pattern. Mental proficiency, gamma is desirable. And as Paula said, gamma is also desirable because it's well associated with love and compassion and unconditional love at that. I mean, honestly, I'm mentioning it again because it's so relevant to me at the moment, but this experiment of Dawson Church's that is just, really all he's doing, I don't know how he's trying to stimulate various neurotransmitters, because the brunt of each meditation is simply to connect you with unconditional love. But I've now seen 15 days in a row, the minute he connects me or starts to suggest that, up goes the gamma. It's just phenomenal. It goes from 1 to 4 microvolts. In upper gamma. So there's no question. And we've seen this, it's not just me, it's everybody, anybody. I've actually hooked up a couple of you here, several of you here, and seen the same thing. Is if you want to stimulate gamma, get in touch with the heart, experience unconditional love and compassion, and also clear out the things that block that, which would be doing theta work. But then gamma's a carrier wave for theta, so you can go down to go up, or you can just go up, and doesn't matter. But I vote for it. as everyone knows.
Judith?
Yeah, I think, even though I work with brains, I think the heart is the key. I think we can get rid of the brain and just, and lead from the heart. And that's what I tell my guys, kind of get your brain out of the way.
I was just working with Stephen Fisher in the last week, and she did mention that she thought gamma was the aha experience, just as you were saying. And also she did mention, as I remember correctly, that women tend to retain gamma as they get older, but it tends to drop off in men as they get older.
I heard that too.
So maybe we need to work harder on gamma, us guys out there.
So there's Elmer Green. Are you familiar with him at all? Elmer Green?
Yeah.
So he's like the father of biofeedback, but he wrote a book, Azawaki, Book of the Dead.
Ozaki book. Yeah.
Azawaki? I don't know how to say it.
We used to say Ozaki.
Ozaki. So the premise of that book was from his wife who had Alzheimer's. And he thought that it was kind of like a going home, and she was making gamma. So, I'm thinking, like, as this evolution, is that where we're meant to go? We start out at that delta as a baby, and is that where we're meant to go?
Or you slide into theta in a second childhood, which, is fine too.
Is that why I want a new BMW in retirement?
Of course. The sensory pleasure too, that's got to be alpha. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was theta. Okay.
Joey, we haven't heard from you.
But my question, I did put it down there, but I was wondering, Paula, or anyone else, how critical are the mind mirror placements, and could the sensors be put on beside the sensors on the cap before you put the cap on? Like, could you get an accurate enough reading if they're supposed to be on the same place versus right beside, and do they fit under the cap? I'm looking at getting a cap that's got, is an open cap, not a full mesh cap. But I was thinking, how critical is all that, and do the sensors affect each other?
It's a great idea. I mean, I measured the Mind Mirror 3 against the Mind Mirror 6 to make sure that they were in alignment, and it's no problem at all unless there's interference, electrical interference between the two systems.
Yeah, that's what I wondered.
It's not that critical. I mean, so their O1 is O2 is here, and so we just put ours in slightly inside or slightly
outside. Yeah, and I'm sure, it would change something, obviously, if you're used to standardly using it, but as long as the cap was in the right place. But I didn't know what having two sensors side by side would even do.
I think you bring up something really interesting with this delta and gamma
relationship.
Yeah, and even coordination. I mean, Gary's pointed out before, and it's absolutely true, that sometimes you move into high amplitude delta and then gamma is stimulated. Same thing goes for theta. I've even seen the same thing go for alpha.
Yes.
But the thing, go ahead.
Sorry. No, sorry about that. One thing that's deeply in my mind was Barry Sturman, when they did the research on gamma, that the gamma they saw with the NASA pilots who had the ability, the best, he said, I don't know how they chose the best NASA pilots, but he said they could hold in mind a whole array of instrumental, data. And he said the good ones, that's where they started to look at 40 hertz gamma. But he said the really good ones, and I don't know how to describe it, but they had like probably milliseconds or intermittent alpha. So the ones that could stay and work and be attentive had this relationship between alpha and gamma.
Makes sense.
Which I don't know if that's like, being able to stay relaxed enough to hold on, being attentive, or I don't know how to describe that, but and I can't remember the fine detail.
And maybe that's where, like, you get so good at something, the performance anxiety, that high beta goes away, and so you just do. You just are.
You just, yeah. Don't know.
As Paula knows, gamma and delta and the beta and alpha couple. So you get a gamma alpha coupling, a gamma theta coupling, a gamma delta coupling.
Oh, right.
So they all work together. You don't, as Judith knows, we don't get these, brain waves isolated from each other, which is what we see in the research is, oh, this brain wave does this, that, and the other thing, but they all work together simultaneously and they couple with each other. And I was just talking to someone this morning about non-dual awareness. And one of the things that they've noticed is that people, and I think, I forgot who it was exactly, that they've noticed that the high gamma, it might be even in a lambda range, 120 hertz, seems to be very closely correlated with non-dual awareness.
Wow.
Not that we can measure that high on our system, but they're using very high-end university sensitive equipment that we don't have access to.
I have seen bad gamma too. So sometimes you'll see it, a pattern correlated with a head injury. You'll see high delta where the injury was, and then high gamma opposite that. And there's some thoughts that that's the microglia, and almost like this area has lost its conductor and now is rogue, and the microglia are just making this rhythm without any guidance.
Or Paula, is there, because I've seen a lot of that too with brain injury, and my thinking is always, if there's so much delta, isn't the system going to try and pull the whole system up? And so you get that dance between high beta and delta?
Maybe. I mean, do you see it opposite where the head injury is, the high gamma? That's usually what I see.
No, not always opposite. Sometimes on the same site. Okay. And I watch it dance. I'll watch it dance on. As they're learning how to create, say, 13 to 15, I'll watch it dance between low and high, and then it starts to be able to hit the 13 to 15 slightly more often, and often with intention. When they say, I want it to go there, you'll see it start to run through. But it's made me wonder about that, that brain, as you say, that brain capacity. Where can it do it before it can learn how to go somewhere else?
You just remind me of my now deceased friend who had a brain injury, and she was in a Home Depot and reached for a gallon of paint, and the thing, one near it tipped and smacked her right smack on top of the head. And she'd been a best-selling author and big wig in communications and a university professor and stuff. And then she fell out with chronic fatigue and had to leave her work. She had some environmental sensitivities in her genetics, and then she developed environmental sensitivities, and she was in terrible shape. And so instead of adjusting her brain, I saw this massive delta on her, but also a massive theta. So I did sessions with her over a long period of time, but the joy for me was to watch that she didn't need to adjust her brainwaves. It gradually became obvious to her that she could use that delta. And so she became a Reiki master teacher, and then an internationally known Reiki master teacher. And she was so incredibly intuitive, that was the power she had as a teacher. And so sometimes, just like Paula said, it doesn't, you don't need to fix it. No. Sometimes you can actually adjust your life for the different patterns. She would always say, I don't feel like that I have my cognitive abilities. I said, it's just because you're not publishing papers. It's because you're every bit as smart. I mean, she was smart as a stinking whip. She just shifted to accommodate. And gradually the environmental sensitivities abated as well, as she herself became a healer and received those healing energies in the process. You've been a wonderful group for this
Yeah.
wonderful teacher. This has been absolutely grand, Paula.
Yeah.
Some people wanted to know what is the similarity between neurofeedback and mind mirror work. And I think if we're going to find similarities, we're going to find them in the brainwave categories, not the way that we approach the work we do, optimization of the system, but just in understanding which category is what, and its function. I do know that years ago, when I was building a website, I did a lot of studies and came to the realization that what neurofeedback and biofeedback do in working with pathology is really just creating the same kind of coherence that we're creating from the get-go, which works down to pathology. So I think that's another point of convergence for us, is that whether we're training consciousness or whether we're training neurons, it's just seeking a point of balance that allows the system to heal and restore itself. And so it's been fascinating to see how you do it. I had a lot of questions about this and didn't understand it, and you've clarified it. And I have a newfound respect now for alpha, which I didn't realize was all over the place. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, for preparing the PowerPoint and telling us these fascinating stories about your clients. Boy, when you decide to do something, you just jump right in that water and do whatever it takes to swim. It's incredibly admirable. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Paula. It was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you, Paula.
you.
Really
It was
appreciate it.
wonderful. Ta.
Thank you.
Loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Excellent. Yes, appreciation. And we hope to see you soon. And, anytime you want to come back and do another program on some targeted question that comes to mind. And I'm going to talk to you about coming over there to Hawley and seeing what this awakened mind pattern looks like on the QEEG. I mean, it's long past time that we do that. Yeah.
And come visit my dear.
Be fun.
Where are you, Paula?
I am in northeastern Pennsylvania, right on the New York border.
Okay, you're closer to Judith than.
Yeah, I'm in the woods.
Yeah.
Great.
Perfect place for creating new ideas for future webinars. Thank you again, Paula. And thank all of you for being here. See you next month.